did they get the miracle wheat from? The story Bohnet tells earlier and the story Bohnet tells later aren't quite the same. That's interesting. So in this article, Bohnet writes to try to defend himself on the miracle wheat. He tries to make it more of a miracle of a story. A question could be asked here. Was Watchtower selling the wheat, or were they looking for donations? And the wheat was a side benefit. So we've laid the evidence out about this, and the viewer can decide for themselves. But as the trial transcript says, it says it was Stoner in the trial transcript says he never met Russell before the trial. It was one of Stoner's salesmen. And of course that's true because that's what the court trial transcript says. And in this Golden Age article, Bohnet writes to defend himself on his bright ideas. He suggests something that sounds quite fantastic. And in the article, he says, several grains of wheat fell on the carpet of Russell's study. And there's a photo of his study in the carpet. When a sales agent of Stoner had attempted to sell it to Watchtower, they decided not to buy. But he dropped a few of the grains on the floor. And Bohnet, these were picked up. And Russell gave it to Bohnet when he requested it. It's almost as if the wheat had gained miracle properties by dropping on Russell's study floor. It just seems like a bizarre addition into the story. So Bohnet said that he then made some of the bushels of wheat and he bought more of the wheat for $1 a pound. That's what he bought from Stoner. And he tried to sell it at the same price and donate that money to the society.
Now, his earlier statement was he grew it from a few small grains.
Yes.
Nothing, and it was his own personal stock. So now here he's changing his story after Russell had passed away, that he magically, like Jack and the Beanstalk, pulled them off of the carpet and they grew miraculously. And then he bought more. That's two different stories right there.
Yeah, so the story changes over the years.
Yeah, and I'm going to lean once again in this case toward Stoner, because he seems to be having the most... I never met the guy. I never met Russell. So I would stick to him over Bohnet, who changed his story already.
But even the U.S. government, the USDA, said Stoner was a con man. Mm-hmm. So Bohnet got taken into his con. Mm-hmm. You know, he saw the newspaper articles. He saw the brochure that Stoner published. Although Stoner changed some of the verbiage to try and make it like it was something more than it was. But it was a con, and unfortunately, some were taken in by the con. We know Watchtower fell for the trick, and I don't think the USDA would have spent a lot of time investigating it. Unless there were other farmers that were also taken in by Stoner's scam. So it's unfortunate that happened, but that's why we have the government and departments like that to try and protect the consumer. That's very important.
At least when they were initiated and started out, they were trying to protect the consumer. Nowadays, we in this world, we question who these agencies are working for at times. But
well, at least when there's a recall on lettuce, the USDA lets us know about it. So.
And broccoli. Just more or less, it seems like Stoner, it's believable that he didn't meet Russell himself. From what I'm gleaning, figuratively speaking, of course, from these articles, is my take on it.
Well, unfortunately, this wasn't one of Bohnet's only bright ideas. He had other bright ideas. If we go to the January 6th, 1920 New Era Enterprise, Bohnet has another sales scheme. He wants to try and make another little bit of money for the society. He decides to sell Brother Russell's cancer cure. And this comes from an earlier sermon that Russell gave on consumption and the gospel. And in it, he basically says, I came into possession of a cancer cure. And it says here, it can only be used for cancers on the surface of the body. but not for those which fasten themselves upon the internal organs, so something externally rather than internally. It's highly recommended by many who have used it. We are informed that the recipe was sold on one occasion by a physician for $1,000 after he had seen good results. We are informed that he has erected a sanatorium for the treatment of cancer and is meeting with success. The death of the doctor who discovered the remedy brought it into the hands of a relative. That relative gave it freely to me, and I am offering it free to all who desire it. So here he's offering it for free. I would publish the recipe, but experience teaches me that more will likely be benefited by it or obliged to write for it. So he's just telling him to write in and he'll send it to him. And there's a history book by William Whalen called Armageddon Around the Corner. And in the book it says, later the pastor was promoting a cancer cure which consisted of nothing but a caustic paste of chloride of zinc. But I looked it up, and this zinc chloride, according to this Wikipedia article and the dermatology website, Dr. Frederick E. Moles, medical doctor, and the history of zinc chloride, this is actually what they use to treat skin cancer cures, so externally, just like the article said. At least this one he wasn't trying to make money, but here, Bohnet in his article says...
So Russell did state that.
Yeah. Russell did state that, and again, Bonnet's trying to sell something. Mm-hmm. Another one of Bonnet's bright ideas, as I said earlier. So Bohnet says, the remedy costs me usually 25 cents per ounce. So you see, I would be out of my time and postage for writing prospective customers and mailing a remedy in a glass vial in powder form. However, I will cheerfully supply the remedy to anyone afflicted with exterior cancer at cost price and give applicant instruction in full. Again, this is something Russell suggested, and I'll give it to you as long as you send me the money it costs me to put it together. Another bright idea by Bohnet. He didn't learn his lesson the first time. He kept going at it.
That seems to be a pattern in the leadership of
no, it seems to be a pattern, not only in, we could see it in this Rutherford era and those who continued on with Rutherford.
You could see a pattern from the Rutherford era on of people keep on repeating the same mistakes, doing things consistently again when they didn't work the first time. That didn't really kind of happen in the Russell era.
And you see that there was always some scheme to try and make extra cash.
And cover it up when it doesn't.
And cover it up later on, yeah. You'll see some of that in our Beth-Sarim discussion. And
our neutrality discussion.
Also the sheep and goats discussion on Judge Rutherford. And it's something that the Watchtower Society continues to do today. I mean, in the earlier Watchtowers, Russell basically comes out and says, hey, if we have to ask for money ever, it means we don't have Jehovah as our backer or God as our backer.
The governing body has asked me to use Proverbs 3:9 as the theme for the message they would like to be shared with the entire household of faith this month. Let's read that text together. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9. And after we read it, we want to consider what are your valuable things. And what does the verse mean by giving the first fruits? Let's read Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9. Honor Jehovah with your valuable things, with the first fruits of all your produce. What are the valuable things with which we can honor Jehovah? What first might come to mind are our material possessions, our finances. For over 130 years, this organization has never solicited for funds, and it is certainly not going to start now.
Seats are free and no collections are ever taken.
It was obvious to the governing body that we could not expect our brothers to continually increase their donations.
And no collections are ever taken.
Most donations, in fact, are contributed anonymously.
And no collections are ever taken.
Most funds come from what you voluntarily put in the contribution box in your Kingdom Hall. This organization has never solicited for funds, and it is certainly not going to start now. And it is certainly not going to start now.
Recently, the organization has made some changes to allow for donating online. The donation information page on jw.org can be accessed via the JW Library app or on the website. By selecting the country where you live, you can see the donation methods available to you.
This organization has never solicited for funds, and it is certainly not going to start now.
This month, I'd like to talk about presenting your gifts to God. We certainly have every reason to consider this topic.
Now, almost every single week in the Kingdom Hall I attend on Zoom online, they're asking for money in one form or fashion.
Give your precious things to Jehovah. Yeah. In addition to the massive amounts of donations.
Yeah.
So we're not talking pennies here. We're talking tens of millions of dollars and more.
And there's a difference too in here. If we go to the June 1926 New Era Enterprise, it illustrates some of the differences that we were talking about between the Russell era and the Rutherford era and what followed. So when Russell's father died, this is Bohnet writing actually, because Bohnet is the one who wrote up this article, and Bohnet is the one who was a stenographer for Russell. So it says, at the death of his father in 1897, he declined to accept his share of the $130,000 estate of the parent, preferring to leave it to all the other members of the small family. The writer, Bohnet, as stenographer of the pastor for many years, wrote out the will on his typewriter at the pastor's dictation. And for the signature of the aged father, who fully endorsed the religious faith of the son, but strongly yet firmly urged his acceptance of the father's inheritance. So Russell could have taken his father's inheritance and chose not to. Now, there's another story that's interesting that says a similar thing. And again, this is Bohnet. So Bohnet gets a letter published by Frank Draper. And Frank Draper goes to Russell and says basically, hey, we can buy you an automobile. And the automobiles cost this much money, and it'll help you get around. And you could use this. And Russell basically declines the offer. Says, hey, it's a nice offer, but if you've got that much money, just, donate it for the work. And remember, in 1915, they were really hurting financially. Macmillan writes a letter saying, I'm coming home. The Watchtower Society is basically broke. We don't have any money, really. We can't keep all these people on, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to do. As I always say, follow the money. We just read Macmillan's statement about the Watchtower's financial status in 1915, but we also have Rutherford's statement about the financials at the end of 1916 through an early Bethelite, Cora Keene Sunbaum.
See, Brother Russell died at the end of October 1916. The next Sunday, the first Sunday in November, was his funeral. Rutherford had been sent away, I understand. He sent a telegram, don't do anything till I come. And when he came, he walked right into Brother Russell's study and took care of things. And the will said that Brother Russell's sister should have charge of the funeral. And my father, and she was down in Florida, and we knew she was poor. And so Papa said, we told Rutherford we ought to send her sister land and give her send money to her so she can, he said, we haven't got any money for that. You know, if you had your wits about you, you might have, but you never mistrusted a brother.
Now, we've heard this before in our Judge Rutherford's death threat discussion. Rutherford writes his sister a couple weeks before the death of Charles Taze Russell, after he leaves California and he's on his way back towards Brooklyn. And he tells his sister, I can't really come home to visit with what little money I have left. Rutherford's financial situation also was dire. He was basically broke. If you haven't seen that discussion yet, make sure you check that one out. Rutherford's financial dealings are always very interesting to track and follow. And we also have this information in the newspaper work. A couple short weeks after Rutherford becomes president, he's already trying to sell property and make money. Here's a Brooklyn Eagle article showing that. The May 1st, 1915 Watchtower also details the financial situation the Watchtower had found itself in by the end of 1914 into 1915. It said, the free volunteer matter, which last year ran up to the enormous amount of 47 millions of copies, must also be cut down. Some of our readers will have orders placed, and this will be the explanation if your orders are not filled entirely. In a word, the retrenchment will extend all along the line, including a reduction in the expense allowances of the Bethel family and curtailment of expense for food supplies. Our readers will be glad to know that the entire family is rejoicing in the privilege of further self-denials for the cause we love to serve, and that the 70 who have gone forth, some of them with tears, also manifest fullest resignation to the divine will, rejoicing in the various steps of divine providence, and continuing steadfast in prayer, faith, and love towards the Lord and the brethren. They let 70 go. That would have been a lot of workers at that time. Putting all of this into perspective, it looks like there's enough evidence to confirm that Watchtower was broke at the end of Russell's tenure for sure. It looks like all of the money went into the work. We have Macmillan's letter and Cora Sunbaum's testimony about Rutherford's statement, which both state the same thing. Instead of springing a little money to bring Russell's own sister to the funeral, he chose to keep whatever money that was left close to home. From this, it looks like Russell believed what he was preaching. I mean, who would manage your finances this way? It looks like at least Russell wasn't into the personal gifts like Rutherford was. We'll see a lot of that in our Beth-Sarim discussion. And Rutherford's automobiles, Rutherford was all for that. Oh, you want to buy me a mansion? Okay, go ahead. You want to buy me a couple automobiles?
For the Lord's work only, though. So there were stipulations in that.
I think
you have to notice Russell didn't say, provided it's, he just said, no, thank you. Put it toward the work. We'll make do with what we have.
You can see you can see the attitude. Russell declines it. Rutherford accepts it, but tries to cover it up by saying, well, it's got to be in the Lord's service. But then he uses it himself. Mm-hmm. He lives in the mansion during the Depression. He has all these expensive cars during the Great Depression and a lot of other things, but we'll get to that in our discussion on Beth-Sarim. Rutherford had no qualms about spending money, especially if it was for himself, basically. Here's Rutherford's expensive cars. And of course, that was right during the Great Depression. And there's Beth-Sarim down in the corner. Now, after all of the evidence that we presented, now Penton's conclusion on Miracle Wheat makes sense. Because Penton says basically about Russell, he was evidently quite sincere in selling the famous grain. Penton suggests that he was more positive about its qualities than he should have been, but as we've seen, it wasn't Watchtower's claims about the grain. It was what they were publishing from the newspapers. And that was Stoner's claim. You know, Stoner was the con man. He conned a lot of people.
And I give Penton credit for presenting Russell's viewpoint of it, and not just making a claim because Rutherford but putting it all in perspective. It seems he seems to have drawn the same conclusion I have.
Yeah, and I think you can only draw the conclusion based on the evidence that you can find. And so that's what I tried to do before I made a decision. Yeah, I could have went and said, oh, here's what Penton says. Let's try and prove what Penton claims. No, I wanted to see. And other books say the other way. So I could have went and just said, let's try and prove that route. No, here's the evidence. Here's the documentation. Where does the evidence lead us? And I think this is where it leads us. I guess I would call Russell naive, and that he put some people in charge and he was basically taken advantage of, and they were taken advantage of by Stoner in his claims about the wheat. So in St. Paul Enterprise, there's another article where somebody talks about the miracle wheat, and it talks about the trial where the Brooklyn Eagle was sued, and it says that they lost the case. But in 1917, it was pending in the court on higher appeal. Here is some documentation that we have that I haven't seen anywhere else. This is part of the appeal that was a couple years later. From this appeal, it looks like Russell had to pay the plaintiff. He had to pay the Brooklyn Eagle their court costs. The appeal wasn't completed. Russell died in the interim. And I think this being Rutherford's idea, I think he wanted to push it under the rug and forget about it. So he didn't go forward in his appeal. And as we can see, Rutherford wasn't as great a lawyer or judge as he claimed. I mean, if we look at the discussion that we had on neutrality, in Rutherford's loyalty booklet, he discusses why they're not saluting the flag. It's because of a decision made at the Supreme Court, except Rutherford completely misinterprets and misunderstands what that was. If you go back to that discussion, we lay out all the documentation and we actually link to it as well. So you can go and look at the documentation and see it for yourself and make your own decisions based on the historical evidence. And to wrap this up, we're going to look at some more embarrassing situations that Bohnet got himself involved in. And we'll follow the rest of the documented evidence up to the time of his death, including a bizarre statement about the Ku Klux Klan that Bohnet made in the New Era Enterprise, and an article on the Klan in the Golden Age. Stay tuned.